scumbags, how are things? My name is Loki, or Darren McGarvey is my Sunday name, and we are on live stream Scotland, and soon we're going to be broadcasting on CommonSpace, which is an amazing new platform which we're going to be talking a little bit about tonight. But just to give you a little overview of what you're watching right now, other than obviously a sexually charismatic host or anchor, as some may describe me in the future. The idea behind this show is to try and move a little bit away from the very yes-centric way of looking at culture and politics and try and respond to the fact that not everybody feels as passionately about the same things. So the idea of tonight and subsequent broadcasts and subsequent content which might be released is to reflect things a little bit more impartially, and also perhaps even add in a little bit of banter for the troops. So anyway, I'll just get on with this evening. Tonight we have a very special guest, and he's been heavily involved in the independence campaign. And by the way, let's have a self-aware moment. I know I'm associated with the Yes campaign, and I know that this guy I'm about to introduce us as well. But I would say, like, you know, I would say maybe we were quite fair-minded. At least I think Micheal Gray is a pretty fair-minded guy, and that's why we're interested in having a discussion. So I'll just say hello to Micheal Gray, journalist extraordinaire.
Journalist, certainly.
Humble. You know, people say I have an ego, Micheal, but I think I'm pretty humble considering how awesome I am, you know what I mean? Anyway, how you doing?
Not bad. I think journalist comes with a lot of baggage as well. So even using that took me a little while to get used to. But, you know, we've all got to have labels.
It's like admitting you got a porn addiction or something, isn't it? I can imagine it was.
It's not always a popular name, but someone's got to claim it.
I think the common term now is hack. Anyway, so how are you doing?
Yeah, not bad.
Not bad. So I think, like me, you've had quite a long, arduous day today, haven't you?
Yeah, I just get up too early and don't sleep enough.
I get that, man. At least you sleep. We talked earlier on. We wanted to. Oh, sorry, that was technology. Do you know what I mean? Like streaming towards the singularity. Loki the cyborg. Anyway, we talked earlier on about the fact that we might be quite highly caffeinated, so we were maybe going to have a safe word. So that, like, if we couldn't answer a question or we weren't feeling as verbose or mentally agile as we would like, we can invoke the safety procedure so that the audience aren't expecting us, you know, to be performing all sorts of erudite verbal gymnastics. Firstly, I just wanted to talk to you about an issue that, well, I'm sure does affect a lot of people. Whether they care about it or not, I'm not sure. But we have the big GE, the big general election coming up. Well, there's a lot of hoo-ha. I've not been following the news the last couple of weeks. Although what I'm kind of hearing for the Twitter and blogosphere is that the evil empire is once again mobilising, stirring to oppress us. And what I'm picking up for it is politicians are telling us, don't vote for the people that you think represent you, otherwise you're going to get the people who don't represent you. Is that accurate? Am I needing to do a bit more reading?
Broadly, yeah, that's what's happening. There's a lot of negative messaging appearing again, telling you, warning you of the consequences of democratic actions, saying that if you vote in a certain way, this other lot that are nasty and brutish will get in, and there'll be untold consequences for you and everyone you love, which, in my view, isn't a very mature way to run things.
That's interesting. So immediately you are you're homing in on the subtext of this, which is democracy's dangerous. Don't vote for who represents you, and that's a kind of reoccurring theme, isn't it? Would you like to talk a wee bit more about just that as a concept?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to fear for some people from democracy. Like, it's, you know, right back at the root, there was a lot of worries about a kind of democracy because, you know, it could result in the masses or a lot of people taking things away from people that have stuff. So just like property, you know, could come under threat from a lot of people having a lot of stuff. Or just you know, in minority rights in general, people are kind of sometimes afraid of what they call the mob, or a mass of people, you know, outweighing political force and power away from a small group of people. So, you know, that's an old story, and I think some of those old myths are being used against people in Scotland. The idea that, you know, if you change things in a certain way, there'll be really negative consequences. That was a theme of the referendum as well. I think, personally, I see it the other way around. I think democracy is a brilliant thing. I think, you know, the more masses of people get involved in making decisions about their lives, where they work, what they do, what they care about, or the country that they live in, the better things will be.
So I wanted to talk briefly about a kind of, maybe not a paradox, but a bit of a sort of a dangerous potential contradiction which might be emerging, in that a lot of people feel the SNP might more strongly represent Scottish interests at Parliament, and also can just like shake things up a bit down there. But the fact that the SNP are so closely tied to this idea of independence, there might be fears on behalf of like no voters, for example, about voting for SNP because they don't want, you know, referendum 2 around the corner. Do you think that there's some of that at play, and like how do you sort of ameliorate that? So how do you stop that from preventing us from representing our own interests?
Well, it's a really good question. The SNP answer to it is that they're not standing on the platform of another referendum. So in the same way in 2007 people voted SNP and they became the government, their platform was to maybe have a referendum. Now they've agreed that that's not on the agenda for the election. That doesn't stop people being concerned about it. If the SNP win the majority of seats, like it or not, that does put independence back on the sort of medium-term agenda. It, you know, highlights the inevitability of another referendum. But if you look at politics as about the Scottish interest, as about wanting Scotland represented in lots of different parliaments, then you can understand why even no voters would vote SNP this time around, because a lot of them do feel let down by Labour, don't feel that the Tories represent Scottish interests. So if it's a debate about Scotland, that's
human interests, they barely represent human interests.
That's the thing. They probably don't. If it's about Scottish interests, then the SNP will be really happy about that, because they'll stand to win from a debate about who stands up for Scotland.
Interesting, you know, talking about this sort of. I like the fact that you are assuming nuance in no voters, which is something that we don't see a lot in elements of the Yes campaign. I know a lot of people who voted no, and I also. This thing's I'm not ready to be a cyborg yet, and I know a lot of people voted no, and I came to understand that, you know, one of the common sort of ways of explaining a no voter, and some people who voted yes passionately, is that they just don't care about food banks and they don't care about nuclear weapons, whereas for me it seemed at least that a lot of no voters just disagreed about the means of tackling things like inequality, poverty, nuclear proliferation, excuse me, and so nuclear profiteroles, I was about to say there, I think. So I mean, in terms of the actual, like, let's bring it back to the yes and no moment. How can people in the yes campaign and the no campaign bridge those divides? Because it seems that there might be more common ground than maybe they realise.
Well, the option that's being touted all over the place and is a real possibility is that there'd be collaboration between Labour and the SNP, shock horror, at Westminster. And that for me represents the very essence of some type of collaboration between the major organisation on the no side and a major organisation on the yes side. And that's really interesting for a number of reasons. It might never happen, it might fall apart for all the tribal reasons that you've mentioned, and you know, it's quite likely that might be the case, but there's a lot of stuff that people in both those parties do agree on beyond the constitution. It would be interesting to see if any form of trust can develop between those two organisations. There's some signs it will, there's other signs that it won't. And you know, we'll just have to wait and see. But I would like people to talk, more openly about what exactly that means. If the SNP and Labour share certain things and have some kind of joint arrangement in London about what happens to the future of the UK tax system, UK social security, UK foreign policy, nuclear weapons, like how can that get the best deal for everyone? And put aside maybe your party loyalty and think about what would that mean? What is it that you want from the government that you're not getting, and who will be accountable for making different decisions after May?
There's also this interest. I mean, obviously the SNP are really benefiting from having a kind of monopoly on political morality just now, at least among their own support. But one of the interesting contradictions that I find, I wonder what you feel about it, is that the SNP have labelled the Labour the Red Tories, and they've labelled Labour the Red Tories for their association with the Conservatives during the campaign. So they've tarred them all with the one brush. However, the SNP are now talking about a collaboration with Labour, who are Tories by proxy, according to SNP logic. So I'm wondering, and this isn't for all SNP supporters, but obviously there is a contingent that is really, feels very strongly. But at the same time, how do you challenge that sort of, that way of thinking where we're too quick to point out the holes in other people's arguments, but we can't confront the difficulties with our own?
Yeah, I think we're still in election mode, and we're still in partisan mode. A lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have been had it not been for the referendum, it became a partisan binary choice, and people, communities, families were all split into different groups. I think overall that was an amazing thing because it took politics into so many people's lives. I think a lot of people then found that sort of love affair with politics hard to give up, and they, all their energy and love and hope a lot of it went into the SNP, and they're still in that kind of mindset about wanting to change the system. There'll be a date, a kind of Armageddon for the establishment, and after that date, the old powers will be routed, and the new powers who are just and got the people's interest at heart will take power. And that's a mindset. It's very difficult to get out of that mindset once you've bought into it. It's also valid in some ways because there's tens of thousands of people out there who felt utterly betrayed by Labour, and not just SNP supporters, people who were Labour supporters, and the Labour Party's admitted that basically that they're down and out in a lot of places where they previously ruled the roost. I think that's quite healthy, that they need a kind of they need to renovate the house a little bit and get rid of some of the dead wood, and that's one stage that I can kind of understand. Maybe after May, there can be more sensible, maybe just nice discussions about the people who are left, what actually we have in common, and maybe talk about flaws, pros and cons on all sides, because the SNP won't be able to remove all inequality from Scotland. That's a generation-long project, and we have to stay critical of all sources of power.
Agreed. One final question, just regarding Ed Miliband as a prospect for Downing Street, and also just as someone who at least is making a lot of noise about moving further to the left than the sort of Blair-Brown era. Naturally, people are sceptical of that, and we see, at least publicly, a split between Murphy and Miliband. Are these things that are going on with Labour actually for real, or do you think a lot of this might be cosmetic in order to present the public with what looks like a clear alternative, but maybe behind the scenes, if Labour and the Tory end up getting into a coalition, that shows that there's no difference?
Oh, I think there are big splits in the Labour Party. We saw that in the last week. Scottish Labour MPs were demanding that Miliband ruled out a deal with the SNP, which would be stupid because Miliband might need the SNP to get into government. So Miliband refused to rule that out in his speech in Edinburgh because it's in his self-interest. So there's a split between Scottish Labour and English Labour that's already been building up. It'd be interesting. I know Nicola Sturgeon actually is going down to London again to make another speech, I think in the next week or so at LSE. And that's once again as a pitch to the English left, saying, we'd work really well together, we can, more powers for Scotland, get rid of austerity and, hopefully they stick hard to that red line on Trident nuclear weapons and stop the renewal there. So there's a lot of, the stuff you're talking about getting people to work across groups and feel less partisan. I think Nicola Sturgeon gets that, because that's basically the manoeuvres she's on at the moment.
Try to get a bit more of a consensus kind of thing. Okay, right, well, what we'll do is we'll move on a little bit. What we'll do is we'll use UKIP as a little bridge, right? We'll use UKIP as a segue. I think maybe that is actually what's happening democratically at the minute as well. Although God knows what it's a segue to. So, we've got the rise of UKIP. We have a charismatic white male leader at the centre of it. In lots of ways, it's just another party the same as a lot of the other parties. Now, the big difficulty with engaging with UKIP is the fear about legitimising what people see as not the most progressive policies, but also that moral rhetoric that people use to disarm people who vote UKIP, to humiliate them into being liberal, further creates resentment, which then that's why people turn to Farage. Do you think there's any way that people could consider themselves liberal could possibly identify in any level with the frustration that people feel to the point where they would turn to someone like Farage?
I think there's, like you're basically saying, there's some kind of hypocrisy in how liberals talk about politics.
Well, to me, it seems like a misunderstanding of the visceral frustration that people feel in the idea that Farage, whether we like it or not, does represent a point of view that's out there and so is legitimate because that's been vested in him by people who pay their taxes. And so
like a lot of folk who are liberal kind of dismiss UKIP and, say, racists, homophobes, sexists, and that's not really much of a discussion and probably isn't going to change UKIP voters' minds. They'll probably just be embarrassed or keep it secret. I think that does happen. Like a lot of the stuff in England and UKIP is driven by a real fear and resentment about immigration, which is itself a similar topic. It's about, misdirected anger and not really something that's openly discussed, and it's, finding someone to blame and quite an angry conversation, So, liberals or a lot of people can push anger onto UKIP voters, and UKIP voters are themselves quite angry and, push their anger onto other people or other communities. So, yeah, I'm all for sitting down and talking more about, just
why people hate blacks so much.
why is there a huge problem in England around immigration about the values of it? Why are people resentful? And in Scotland, there was the polls out from the BBC, and I noticed that a number of people attacked the BBC for reporting that there's a lot of negative attitudes in Scotland about immigration. And I think that's the wrong way around. I think we then have to counteract and explain if, like me, you think immigration is a good thing. If, like me, I think Scotland would benefit from more immigration. I think that, people that come from lots of different cultures are good socially, good culturally, good, if you take it that far economically, the people that do a lot of hard work, if you move somewhere, you're more likely to go there to work hard and to contribute, and you care about where you live because you've bought into that society. I think people need to be more vocal about that in Scotland. You can't assume that you can that you want the attitude to disappear. You have to speak up for immigration if you think it's a good thing.
And it seems it seems to me at least, that a lot of this turmoil is a byproduct of this kind of consumer democracy that we now live in, where up to a point, the politicians derive their power by giving the public what the public is demanding, as long as it's not the full democracy. So sometimes that will happen even if the public is not armed with the facts or the right information. For example, I did some research about immigration, and I found that the top 10 countries where people come from are all countries that Britain either is heavily involved in just now on some level, whether it's official, covert, humanitarian, military, or has been in the past. And I mean, maybe I'm making a leap, but there is some kind of link between the sort of world order that the West wants and the massive migration of people between countries. But we don't seem to grapple with that as a populace.
Well, the major move towards immigration into Britain came post-war when they liberalised the rules for Commonwealth countries. And those kind of larger scale immigration from Commonwealth countries into Britain, at least that was that form of immigration is remembered because it was a byword or byproduct for race issues, and it was largely from certain African or Asian countries where basically it was a mixture of race prejudice that then had an economic excuse about claims that it was driving down wages and that type of thing. So, those are two issues there. It's not just about migration. Sometimes this is just, that's where you have to be a bit broader talking about UKIP. The immigration issue is used as an excuse to be racist, and it's also misdirected anger about the state of people's jobs, the state of people's pay, the state of the economy. People have legitimate anger about being underrepresented, about being underpaid, about feeling left behind, about feeling like no one represents them, and those people, will vote for someone who taps in to that anger. So I think you've got to start at those basics and start saying, there is a different economy we can have. That you can have multiculturalism works, and I think that's just a better way to engage in the conversation because the arguments win.
I think it's very interesting in I guess in one sense UKIP and parties like the SNP have a thing in common, that they're a byproduct of this vacuum that's been created by the complete failure of the system as it is to address people, and obviously up here we have, this programme in itself, the project that you're working with just now, CommonSpace. These are all things that are emerging as a necessity from a citizen's point of view, where people are saying, okay, for where we're at now, let's look at that journey. People voted no, we didn't get fair representation in the media, let's become the media, but let's not become a pure partisan media, and then here we are, So that's that logical journey. And it's fascinating. So CommonSpace has been live now for just over a month. It's based in Glasgow, but it's covering the whole of Scotland. Could you just maybe give me a wee summary of what it is, what it's doing? And
I'll try my best. So
you've got something really prepared, haven't you, man? You've got
yeah, I've got at least about 50 words of notes that I scribbled on the car on the way here.
That's a bit like The Vow. It's a bit like The Vow, Alan Rennie.
We know I wrote this. So that's
right,
transparency and all that. But CommonSpace was set up through Commonweal as a kind of new digital news service in Scotland. We've got 4 full-time staff based in Glasgow. So we've got Angela Haggerty, who's our editor. She's great. She's got good experience working elsewhere in the media. And you've got 3 young
minions.
I don't know. I'm maybe too tall to be a minion. I don't know what I'd call myself.
You're a capo. You're a capo.
We'll go with that. And one of which is me. And so we've got a team of 4 working on a rolling news site 5 days a week. And we're putting out a lot of content, a lot of news stuff, trying to, write news and pieces and try and set the news agenda in Scotland. So I wrote down, these were my 50 notes, some of the examples just for folk at home to see what on earth are they doing and why is it important. This is just from the last 2 days. We published 23 news stories, a whole section of sort of views pieces from elsewhere online. And some of it was like Liam O'Hare, who's one of the other guys doing it. He was writing about a forced eviction that took place up in Inverness, something that's kind of forced out due to kind of issues with our landlord. Ben Ray, who's the 4th member of the team, was writing about the realities in Glasgow after the Commonwealth Games, about issues with access to sports services and the inequality in Glasgow.
I've seen that.
We're writing about Sweden cancelling its arms deal with Saudi Arabia. That's a pretty big deal. The fact that community budget amendments were passed at Holyrood, so we're covering stuff in the Parliament about community right to buy, issues with electoral registration, and just today the calls for laws governing UK state surveillance being changed, or calls for them to be changed by one of the major committees at Westminster. So it's a kind of mix of community issues, stuff that's stuff that sometimes isn't getting covered because it's voices who usually don't have much access to the media. Things that are to do with political activism, so stuff people are campaigning on, issues with abuses of power and people that maybe aren't scrutinised as much as we think they should be they politicians or corporations or business, and as well as trying to lift up some of the good news stories of things that are changing as a result of people's efforts, and trying to put that on the one site day in, day out, which is exhausting, exhilarating and worth it.
I'll bet. I mean, it's quite a fascinating prospect. And to be a month in, I mean, like, I don't know how much the viewers know about the work that goes into creating that kind of content, which not only has to be good to read, but also has to be legally sound and accurate. I mean, that's a hell of a lot of work. That's a very small editorial team, so that's massive. Now, I think that for me, anyway, at least the interesting thing about CommonSpace, at least as an organisation now, is the fact that it's a product of the post-referendum environment. So it's something fresh. It's something new that reflects where we are now. It doesn't necessarily come with I don't know, the baggage, you know, that a lot, and we all feel baggage for the campaign. It's nice to have a clean slate. You finding that I guess I'm trying to say it without seeming like I've got hang-ups about the campaign, you know what I mean? But there's something about getting into something with a new energy and a new zest for it. And were there any specific concerns with media as it is that were part of the idea behind CommonSpace? What were you trying to address by creating it?
So it's a good question with about, you know, I could do a lecture on the answer, because it's just, you know, there are vast issues with the media, and people in the media are the first to admit that. Like, there's just a problem of resource, first and foremost in Scotland. There's not a lot of people who are paid to do investigative journalism. There are fewer and fewer people being paid to do journalism, full stop. There's been cutbacks at basically all the major Scottish papers, and that impacts on the quality and accuracy of output, whether you like it or not. So from a starting point, the media and the institutions that pay for journalism are on the back foot. There are issues of ownership. The fact is that, you know, most media organisations are owned by large corporations with shareholders. That puts certain financial pressures downwards onto the editorial team, onto the advertising staff in those papers, about just what your incentives are, who you're owned by, and where's your profit margin. All these questions put pressure on how you construct reporting and construct a media organisation. A great example of that recently was Peter Oborne at The Telegraph, who revealed quite directly that The Telegraph had been put under substantial pressure by HSBC Bank in terms of how they reported on the bank's issues, shall we say, to do with tax affairs, to put it politely and legally. And effectively one of their big investigations was pulled so they could have a massive advertising deal with HSBC. Now, Peter Oborne, who worked at the Telegraph, resigned on principle, but also conceded that he understood the problem that editors and owners faced, where effectively they had a big wad of cash on the table to keep their operation afloat, and the zero profit you get from having editorial and journalistic principles. There's all these issues that go on underneath. There's the problem with the PR culture and journalism, which I think a great research project in Cardiff found that the vast majority of stories in the press are put there by organisations, by press releases. You know, they're not created by the journalist, they're often given to the journalist. Someone has put that front page story to the journalist to go on the front page. These are all really difficult structural questions that 4 people can certainly not solve. And we have those very same pressures over, you know, how you direct the organisation, how you fund the organisation, how you create your news values, where you get your content from. And it's really difficult. Like, to take 3 examples, you know, I did a story about care workers in Argyll and Bute who the claim is aren't being paid the minimum wage, which is illegal. Liam O'Hare did a fantastic investigation that got 3 pages in the national newspaper on asylum seekers and claims of basically abuse by people who were involved in contracting services to those asylum seekers in Glasgow. Ben Ray wrote 2 fantastic pieces, one on the Duke of Buccleuch, who's the largest private landowner in Scotland, and issues he had with land reform, and Halliburton Corporation. It's a massive organisation, and their investment...
Just waiting for a red dot to appear on your head right now, man.
And their interests in sort of fracking in the future of energy. So in each one of these cases, the problem is that you often have either people that have no representation, that are afraid to speak out, like the care workers who don't want to be demonised and sacked because they don't have a union, or asylum seekers who have real problems of access to so many things. and are often literally being, removed from the country and flown back to places where they're in danger. Those type of people, it's near impossible for them to go on the record for fear of further intimidation. So as a journalist...
They're like college lecturers?
Well, it exists elsewhere as well. It exists in other areas of public life as well. And people who are afraid to speak out. And without people speaking out, as a journalist, it's very difficult to tell someone's story truthfully and accurately, because you simply can't say it without them telling you or without them going on the record. So you've got that problem. The other side of the scale, you've got people like Halliburton and large vested interests who have legal power, they have financial power, and they will and have got angry and belligerent and critical, and will go through sort of processes of criticism to try and get you to stop saying certain things. So
you've had experience with this as well, haven't you? I wanted to talk about that because I think this is great as well. Viewers might be getting an insight into the way that, you know, a journalist who wants to be a real journalist thinks. You know, and journalists put themselves into harm's way, and also journalists, like some politicians, know that they're getting into a game where the public largely will scoff at the very idea of them. But I think a mark of your sort of, this might have been a wee bit earlier before the journalistic stuff, but you wrote an article which was published by National Collective, which was pointing out links between the Better Together campaign and an oil corporation with some dodgy other links to things. I'll leave it to you to say all the things so that they're legally sound, but could you just explain a wee bit for the viewers your experience of that? Because I think that is going to be quite illuminating for them.
Well, some people might be aware of it because it's a kind of old school issue that I had to deal with when I was still, you know, a young, naive student, and
with great hair.
Did I?
Ah, yeah, great hair. I remember
that's definitely a lie. That's defamation. I think I've got a case under defamation for that. But it was basically writing a story about Ian Taylor, who was chief executive of Vitol PLC, who gave £500,000 to Better Together, and the business, Vitol PLC, has some rather dodgy dealings with Arcan, who was a war criminal, indicted under 24 counts of crimes against humanity at The Hague. And he was essentially kind of paid sort of money in a kind of rather dodgy fashion by directors at Vitol to do with getting oil back from Serbia. And you know, he was also involved in the sort of cash for access scandal because he'd been a large Tory donor. There was other issues about tax avoidance with the company, with gaining Libyan oil contracts, with issues about breaking the oil embargo on Iran, the oil for food.
I just love the
sanctions.
fact, sorry to cut in, but I really have to commend you for going into real detail about what you said, because the experience and how it transpired, for a lot of people, it would have frightened them to even mention it again or talk about it again. You know, so like you ended up in a scenario where basically they came over and they're like, don't say that, or we're going to come after you. Essentially,
yeah, and I wasn't the only one who had that experience. The idea of legal writs or kind of cease and desist letters, as they're called, is you send a cease and desist letter to a writer or a journalist or a media organisation and you say, retract this information, promise never to publish it again, and apologise, which is what myself and Ross Colquhoun at National Collective received at the time. There was also one sent to Stuart Campbell at Wings Over Scotland, who also covered the story after us, and the Herald, who wanted to follow up the story. So Collier Bristol, I believe, were the law company way back in the olden days. They also represent what was Rangers Football Club, and so they were quite involved in, or experienced in sending lots of cease and desist letters to the media. So myself, with no real experience, no formal journalistic training from the NUJ, no legal background, was slightly concerned about this. You know, just possibilities of being dragged through the courts for a couple of years is not a happy experience.
So let's just give a bit of context that the article was published on National Collective, so that's why Ross Colquhoun is involved. And so Ross Colquhoun backed you on this?
Yeah.
Aye, so that was like, so both of you, I was reading about the press conference. So did they proceed with action once you actually like So how did you come to the decision that you were going to stand up to them? Sorry.
Oh, through discussions and a lot of like internal chat, like we decided to seek legal advice from Amir Anwar, who helped us free of charge to get legal advice. But the main
That's good for everybody to know, man. He does homers. Do you know what I mean? Like I've got a few legal issues myself, mate. You know what I mean?
There we go. Well, I don't know. People can always just tweet me, but I won't be much use. You know, I can just direct them towards some law textbooks or something like that. But the main, the moral of the story was the other media were no longer afraid of covering the story for legal purposes, as they had been prior to that. And it was ages ago. Don't like dining out on old dinners, but it's still, it's an example of just how the media can sort of censor things and is limited by outside organisations that have more financial and legal might than yourselves. So even as a small team of four journalists in Glasgow who are quite keen to be adversarial and to push the boundaries and to be more open about having people with different views and having debates and giving access to people who don't usually get access, that's a huge challenge because there are still risks, there are still financial risks, but we'll try our best.
Okay, so we've got about 10-15 minutes left. The final thing that I wanted to just I guess we're just kind of linking back to it. We were talking, we were getting quite excited actually just before we came on, because you had talked about this report that was released regarding GCHQ, and then we got into talking about the Edward Snowden documentary, which you wrote a great column about in the National, about how we should be inspired to be brave and try and tell the truth. And then I wasn't surprised. I know that you're very well learned anyway, but in relation to the particular issue of surveillance and mass surveillance, we started getting quite into depth about that. So GCHQ, actually the CIA of Britain, for anyone who doesn't know, they actually have got more, they can actually snoop on us more than the CIA can snoop on the Americans. Is that right?
More than, the words of Edward Snowden were the GCHQ is worse than the National Security Agency.
Bless me.
Which is, bless us all, which is based in the States. I'm not religious, but I just felt the need to get a little happy humanist message in there.
Aye, a blessing's good.
Yeah, well, we're talking about surveillance, I don't know. It's like,
aye.
Didn't really fit. But yeah,
it
was quite a big deal. It should have been a bigger deal. There's a lot of folk in, I've got a cat coming over. If
she comes over to you, that means you got nice. A good spirit.
That's quite nice, eh?
You notice how she evades me.
Getting distracted.
Aye.
I'm easily distracted. But it's, there was a report that came out today by the Intelligence and Security Committee down at Westminster, which was formerly chaired by Malcolm Rifkind, before something...
Oh, Big Malcolm,
Big Malcolm.
Is he a Sir Malcolm Rifkind?
I think he is, but I kind of ignore royal titles as a kind of editorial.
Oh, aye, that's like me. I don't look at Lamborghinis. Do you know what I mean? I think like, them. Aye, don't look at that Lamborghini.
It's a bit, it's a bit of a waste of time, all the long titles and names and stuff. So it was chaired by Malcolm Rifkind until he had to resign, sadly, recently, due to some accusations of impropriety relating to lobbying deals. So that committee put out the first ever full report into all the activities of GCHQ and what they called intrusive surveillance techniques. And GCHQ has quite a bad history of a number of cases going back just in the last decade of certain dodgy activities. For instance, there was a whistleblower who came out about them being involved in activities monitoring the actions of UN officials leading up to the Iraq War. So the idea of basically snooping on countries that might have been opposing the UK-US invasion. There was the case that came out of them also.
Liberation. It's no invasion. Yeah. There's no invasion. There's no invasion. We're making the world safe for democracy. Continue.
Yes. I'll put the Iraq War to one side because that might be a whole new show. You got material for show number 2. But basically, there was lots of issues like this. I'm snooping on the G20 summit in London. That came out recently as well. A lot of people globally in Germany were up in arms at this. They were quite angry. Merkel's phone was supposedly being tapped and listened into as part of this whole broader global surveillance thing. but there wasn't a lot of dissent, shall we say, necessary dissent in the UK about it. It was quite muted. And The Guardian led on it and did a lot of great investigative work. And other newspapers, so-called newspapers, basically called them traitors, called the journalists who were involved in that reporting traitors. But I think they've been vindicated. So this report today called for the current rules, regulations and laws to be scrapped and to be completely rewritten, and basically saying that the intelligence services shouldn't be above transparency and accountability, that they have to be transparent and be accountable to the people we elect, which is a big step forward.
You can just imagine, though, that you can imagine those recommendations. Like, you can imagine literally, like, David Cameron sitting there, you know, with his big Cheshire cat on his knee like a Bond villain, just like laughing as he puts each page of it in a big shredder, do you know what I mean? Just like laughing like a megalomaniac. Right, okay, so we're gonna finish. We're gonna tie all this up now. Obviously, we're gonna have to talk about something that's at least got a bit of traction in the Twitter sphere today, and that is. Have we got interactions? Oh, sorry, I didn't. Right, okay. Well, maybe we'll need to extend that a wee bit.
We'll be way too insular.
I didn't know that. Sorry, I thought if I had this thing in my ear, maybe I would know that. We were having internet problems earlier, so I didn't know if we were going to have the social media thing. But I've just been informed by my compadre here that we do indeed. So, will we talk about the National Collective thing now, or will we take some questions to break it up a wee bit? What do you think?
Questions.
Take some questions to break it up.
Let's liven up.
Democracy, do you know what I mean? Like, let's put it to a vote.
I specifically asked if there were any abusive messages about myself that they were aired.
Right, okay, brilliant, nice one.
Any abusive or critical messages, because I was keen to just broaden the discussion as wide as possible.
Excellent.
It's good to get a little bit of self-criticism.
Well, the worst comment that I got today was, you're a national embarrassment.
Which is actually quite a good thing.
I think
not just a localised embarrassment, but to the entire nation.
A national embarrassment.
Which is kind of like a figurehead. That's kind of
Aye, exactly, man. You're just feeding me segues, man. Right, let's take some questions then, right?
They've all been very kind to you, Michael.
Oh. That's not like Twitter at all.
No, they've all been very good. Got a question here from Robert Dunsmore. And it's a question on GERS figures. Does Michael know how much income revenue isn't included in official numbers? Now, which GERS figures that is, I'm not too sure. I suppose it could apply to both sets.
It's no Rangers anyway, that's
a
for
little,
sure. They can count that in one hand.
The speaker made a cheeky Rangers joke there that I'll just, avoid completely.
Oh, right, okay.
Nice,
But I've, like many people, I've not got access to the Rangers accounts, but the GERS accounts, Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland figures were put out yesterday. It's a big, exciting running series of 34 years of brand spanking, exciting information on the Scottish economy. And they basically showed, once again, Scotland has a higher average deficit than the UK. There's a lot of people that ask questions about how the numbers are formed and whether they're accurate or not, and what's included, what's excluded. I spent a lot of last year reading all the reports, which...
Wow, man! It sounds like a hoot, man.
all 33 at the time, or all 32 because it was prior to last year's. So wow, that. I did a lot of the things we did for the referendum. Reminiscing, I read the what was it, the Asset Register of the United Kingdom, which is 1,100 pages long. I skim-read certain parts of it because there's all sorts of weird financial stuff here. On the question, what money is not included, there's questions about whether corporation tax from offshore revenue is included, because that's specifically excluded from the corporation tax bit of the report. And there's questions about how you measure sort of export places. So, for instance, exports from non-Scottish ports, are they included in the overall tax registers of Scotland? It's impossible to answer those questions because we don't have a Scottish tax system. Revenue Scotland's only just starting up. We don't actually formally, check all these measurements and break it down. HMRC isn't very good at doing it. So basically it's tough to know the exact level of Scotland's total income. What's more interesting is the expenditure, because I can say fairly confidently that I think it was £8.6 billion was allocated as spending in Scotland last year, which is either difficult to identify or does not exist in Scotland. And that specifically is military spending, which is over £3 billion, debt, basically paying for the UK's debt interest, which is also over 3 billion, and something called shared services, which is broken down in a number of ways. It's kind of civil service spending. These three areas, basically, you don't know how much of that resource is spent in Scotland. So depending on your political position, you can basically question the bottom lines of the report and say, would Scotland spend that much on its military if it ran its own finances? According to the SNP, they'd spend 2.5 billion. Ireland spends a lot less. So there's big questions here about whether the GERS figures properly reflect what Scotland's economy would be if you were looking at it autonomously.
Right, okay. You had me there when just a bit where you said break it down, man. That's I always just want to start like a rap cipher. You know what I mean? Like you got to then take the figures and then break it down.
See,
that's
like,
wow, he just wants to start the rap.
A lot of people were saying that we need to break down Scotland's finances a little bit. So maybe if it was in rap, it'd get a bigger and broader audience.
Aye, definitely, man, definitely.
But you're the man for that.
I am indeed. Another question then.
Okay.
Sorry, who was that? What was that other guy's name? He sounded
That
like
was Robert Dunsmore.
from emailing from Hogwarts. Dunsmore's one of their names, isn't it, man? Sorry, patter on.
Okay, this one's from someone called Brian Lemond. I wonder who that is.
Brian Lemond.
Brian Lemond,
All
yes.
right, cool.
And Brian's question is, if Labour and the SNP can't come to some agreement, therefore letting in the Tories, some might say the SNP let the Tories in. What are your thoughts?
Interesting.
Me or you?
Oh, he's not asking me. He's
asking me.
Aye.
Oof. Well, it's a bit like your question right at the start about politics driven by fear. The what if bad thing happens question.
It'll be the second time the SNP technically have let the Tories in, won't
But
it?
you see, it's what's assumed by the question, like who's to blame if Labour and the SNP don't do a deal? Like if Labour basically say they love nuclear weapons so much that they don't want to do a deal with the SNP.
I could just imagine that press conference.
Like if Ed Miliband comes out really openly and says, no, we just really love nuclear weapons so much. Like, well, what was his name? When the Labour cabinet minister after 45 says there's got to be a bloody Union Jack on it, is what he said. That's when the Labour government decided to keep the nuclear weapons system, because it just you had to have a big British nuclear bomb. So if basically they're really desperate and the boys want to keep their toys, do the SNP have to sell out? Sell out everyone? Sell out all their principles over the last 40 years? How much do we want the SNP to sell out in that situation? If they say no change to austerity, if they say more cuts, and Scotland will get more cuts, do we want them to do a deal with Labour no matter what? I think that would be spineless. I think that would be the exact same problem that Nick Clegg fell for, doing a deal, selling out your principles. The exact same problem New Labour did, just get into power, sell out your principles. And if the SNP want to do anything, I think they should be taking a stronger negotiating position and being straight with people and saying, we will bring down a Labour government if they are spineless and support nuclear weapons more than people, more than healthcare, more than education. And that's not letting the Tories in. The Tories get in if Labour fail to run a left-wing government. And I think if that type of situation arrived, it's Labour's fault.
Well, there you go, Mr. Lemond. It was a pretty solid answer.
Pretty long though as well. I was going to try.
Well, I was just thinking about in fact, I had a question that was kind of unrelated. I guess it's kind of related in a way to Labour though, because I'd actually be putting in freedom of information requests. But maybe you can help me with the answer, because I've never actually met her. But is Margaret Curran computer generated?
I've never met Margaret Curran either.
See, this always happens. I used to think Leslie Riddoch was computer generated, and then someone I really trust met her.
I met Leslie Riddoch as well.
Right, okay, well I don't really trust you. I don't know you enough to really trust you
Then
yet.
it could have been a hologram.
Aye, exactly.
We were talking about GCHQ and technological innovation and
Aye,
stuff.
aye. Because I was kind of thinking Margaret Curran, I would imagine she looks like somebody who really loves nuclear weapons.
This whole thing's pretty fake. There's not even anything behind us.
Aye, exactly.
We should have started with a disclaimer. I said earlier that, Loki, I wanted to say that, Loki, you'd broken into the BBC Scotland studios, and that we've kind of hot-wired the place, and we've currently taken over Pacific Quay, which is in Govan, we should say.
Aye, exactly. Don't get me wrong, man. I think a few of us have been trying to break into the BBC for a while.
Yeah.
Now.
So who knows? So, some things you just can't tell.
Well, I'm waiting on that freedom of information request to come back, and they've got 20 days to let me know. Anyway, next question.
Well, next question is really pertinent to that little bit of conversation. It's Robert Dunsmore again, and the question is, if Labour and the SNP set up in Westminster, what are the chances for getting broadcasting fully devolved?
It's not going to happen.
I guess that answers that.
There we go, eh? I always think the word devolved is interesting because evolution implies that, well, at least if you misunderstand evolution, that it implies that there's an improvement. So devolution would mean an unimprovement. Isn't it? Like, as opposed to revolution, which is just like, yeah, let's just keep it turning, let's just...
To be slightly more like, helpful to the guy with the
educated
question.
about it.
Yeah, and just saying no. Which sometimes is a good answer, no. But it's, if what the question means is like, will Scotland have more control over the BBC and how the money's spent and how the place is run, I'd say, pretty unlikely. I think there's already things that they've done. They had the Scottish Broadcasting Commission, which proposed some pretty basic things. They were all ignored. They've moving towards the BBC at least bothering to turn up at Holyrood committees. Previously, they just said they couldn't be arsed. The Director General of the BBC
got somebody to phone in for them.
Yeah, it was kind of like,
phone in for them.
I'm kind of busy.
Right.
Why, so there's some. I think those type of things would be better. Just like slightly more accountability. Just a change in the BBC culture. And I think
Hang on, are you implying that there is a culture at the BBC?
There's definitely a London-centric problem with the BBC.
Oh, London-centric. I just thought culture in general, you know what I mean? Sometimes it can be a bit culturally sterile in there,
Aye, well, you'd know more about that than me because you'll follow their cultural output.
You should be at those
you're the culture at this. I'm just politics. Obviously, I followed all their political coverage and there's good people in there, mainly good people, but there's definitely a real problem with how their London HQ reported the referendum.
There you go, Dunsmore. Right, we're going to wrap this up now. We're just going to take a couple of minutes quickly to address the National Collective stuff, which obviously people are going to be interested to know about. So I guess, from my point of view, it's good to see people talking about it. The only thing I want to say is that this isn't an issue that's just came up for me, and I'm sure you'll be able to vouch for that at least. I know you're in close proximity to ANC. My frustration stems from the fact that it's been a long time of me raising these same issues, not just NC, but generally, Commonweal, Bella, at my college. So part of my frustration is seeing the debate get traction, but then people who don't really know what my work has been, to know that my intentions at least start to try and scrutinise a potential institution that I think could be really effective and that I would love to be a part of. Is there anything about any of the things I said regarding democracy and practicing what we preach, or is there anything that you took issue with what I said? Then let's just have it. Let's just lay it out right now.
I think this is, I think it's still the big elephant in the room in Scotland is the fact that thousands of people dedicated, 2 years plus of their lives, a lot of just, eating, drinking, sleeping, and referenduming. And, that's personally quite exhausting and a lot of commitment, and so much of people's lives became tied up in it, and it makes it very difficult, I think, to criticise or to move away or to think about what happened in an outside way, because there's just so much tied up in everyone's lives about it, and so it's difficult. I think the elephant in the room is the fact that there wasn't really scrutiny or a big discussion just about the whole Yes movement afterwards. Not just single organisations, but simply why did we lose?
Aye, exactly. It's that looking in the mirror thing, isn't it? And I mean, I'm coming at it from an angle of I've almost ran a youth project into the ground. And people might say that's not as big a magnitude as the independence referendum, but this was young people's lives I was dealing with, and I was drunk and I was behaving improperly, and I wasn't listening properly. I was getting too attached to furthering myself at times, and I was being dishonest with the young people that I was supposed to be leading. So, I mean, it's important for me to be clear about that, my own shortcomings, and me coming at it from a position of relative experience about dealing with people, listening to people, not just managing them to get what I want. So I guess one of my suggestions to National Collective were coming from I was trying to show solidarity with that difficulty and getting something off the ground and trying to keep everyone happy and not being able to. Anyway, we're going to tie it up. It's been a brilliant chat. It's excellent to just have this discussion, and I thought we had good banter. Anyway, you can tune in. I think it's probably going to be next week, but we'll let you know anyway. So, as they say in the hip hop community, you know, and me being a Fresh Prince of Bel End myself, as we say in the hip hop community, keep it real, and we'll get back to you about what's happening next week. And as Micheal said earlier, quite right, he says that, Loki, you're the culture, you know. Peace.